While we sleep, the guardians of the night take to the streets, having said goodbye to those they love. Each other knowing they may never say these words again. They face the evil that we run from. They dedicate their lives to those that would hate them because they wear the badge. They wear the badge not for the glory or recognition, but for the passion to help others. This is the LEO First Podcast. We'll talk to the men and women in law enforcement, those that have retired, those that keep the prisons secure, and anyone who's impacted by law enforcement. We'll peel back the curtain, and you'll get the real stories, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Every law enforcement officer has a story to tell. Get ready to hear from the men and women who put their lives on the line every day for their communities and their country. Welcome to the LEO First Podcast. Now, here's your host, Michael Laidler.
Hey everybody, it's Michael Laidler, your host of the LEO First Podcast, and welcome to another amazing episode. We have an individual who is coming from a surprisingly cold area already. When we're talking about the temperature and the weather before the show, she actually caught me off guard because if you can't tell when you look at the video, she's actually wearing a sweater already. It might be called a jacket. I don't know. In Texas, we don't wear stuff like that until February. But when I asked her what the weather was, she was like, it's in the high 40s. I was like, man, it's like in the high 80s in Texas. So I was very confused. So I'm excited to have her on here because she's freezing already just to be on this show. And she has her favorite jacket on. So that's pretty cool. As usual, guys, you know, the point of this show is to humanize the badge and bring awareness to what we do, but also let you guys know how important you are to us as a community. And you have supporters out here. And I know our guest tonight will definitely enlighten you guys and share some of the experience she has in law enforcement through some of the things she's doing. She's in the resilience. She's in the mental health. She's in the peer support. She's in a department that has, I want to say 35,000 to 40,000 officers. So she's used to being around a lot of people with things going on. So I'm 100% certain that she's going to be able to shed light on different things that's happened in her life and things that can improve you based on her own experiences. So you guys know I like to ramble and I try to stay away from it, but I get excited, especially on these late night podcasts that we're recording. And I do it because it's fun. So I'm gonna stop rambling, guys. So needless to say, without further ado, our guest tonight is gonna be Dina Campbell, and I got it right. I've been practicing all night, guys. Dina, tell us about you.
You did great. Thank you, Michael. So I have 12 years with the NYPD. First, a wife. My husband is also a sergeant in the NYPD, and together we've been married 12 years. We've been together for longer than that. We were high school sweethearts. But we have 3 kids. And we're just, going through the day-to-day of trying to balance law enforcement and home life, work, commutes, like all the unexpected surprises and the chaos that comes with it.
It's crazy. We're going to jump right into this family situation because it's not many couples. There's not many loving homes out there that have a husband and a wife that's been in law enforcement for over a decade and together before you started. That is almost unheard. Like there's statistics out there and you literally like that criminologist right now is just pissed off right now because they're like, no way, they're lying. They could have been married that long, but you guys have done it. So you just said something in your intro outside of you having your husband, you guys having 3 kids. You talked about work-life balance. You guys are both in law enforcement. How do you balance work-life balance?
When I figure it out, I'll let you know. Right now, I have no idea. I'm making it up as I go. We have support with the kids. Like that's crucial. Thank God. We have family and our babysitter is fantastic. Like she's a stay-at-home mom. So she's kind of there whenever we need her, which is, I can't even tell you, a godsend.
When you say it's like I lose my train of thought thinking about 3 kids, a sergeant and an officer, and I think it's the largest law enforcement agency, at least in North America, probably the world. I don't know across seas like those Scotland Yards and some of those other places, but it almost gives me a loss of words just thinking about the work-life balance. do you guys have like a daily discussion about this? Is it like a monthly thing? Is it just like flying by the hip? Like, how do you guys like act? I know our viewers are thinking, okay, we know what she's saying. She has a babysitter. The babysitter stay at home mom, but you still have to have some planning. If you were coaching another spouse, male or female, on how to create the balance that you and your husband have, which you say you're still trying to figure out, but you're at least doing it. What are some tips and strategies that you would give them out the gate?
Communication all the time. I mean, our commute is like a little over an hour and 15 minutes each way. So in the mornings, like I'll usually leave my house at like 5 a.m. we leave. And if, we're on the phone in the morning, sometimes planning out the day, like, what are you doing today? What are you doing today? What's going on after school? And then on the drive home, we're talking about like what our evening routine is going to look like, who has what after school activity and what's for dinner. And we kind of just plan out the week as we go. And then, over the weekend, we'll kind of game plan and sit down and talk about what are we doing, this upcoming week? What do we have going on? And so forth.
When have you seen communication not work out, like as far as with all that scheduling? Like what hiccups have you've had to have some hiccups somewhere?
Oh my gosh, yeah. Usually we both do days, but sometimes, one of us gets stuck late or, sometimes one of us is working an overnight shift and we can't like come, get the kids or whatever. And I just keep making phone calls until somebody picks up and they're like, yeah, that's no problem. We can watch the kids for a couple hours until you get home.
Hey, but what's funny? A lot of people kind of know my story as far as some of my career path. And when I was a Border Patrol agent, I didn't have any kids. I was married. And when my wife at the time became pregnant, one of the first decisions we made on leaving Texas to go from Border Patrol to federal corrections in Florida was the support side, because we realized that although it was only one kid, how difficult, like we had enough sense to know that we can't raise a kid on our own. And I always tell people, for me, we went combined salary making 150 grand to living with her mom and me making 48 grand while she went to school full time, a transition for family, because we wanted that support. If you didn't have the support, like where do you think you would be at?
If we didn't have the support, I don't know if we'd be able to make it work, both of us working on this job. And actually, even before we got married, I said to him, because he was taking the test and he's like, just take it with me, as this was supposed to be my backup plan. So I'm like, all right, I'll take the test. I'm like, but if it ever comes to the point where we get married and we have a family and this job becomes too much, like, then I'm out, because it's a great career. But to me, at the end of the day, it's still just a job. And I would rather be home keeping the family together and stable while you work, if that's what it comes down to, because that's my priority.
Family first, right?
Always, yes.
And that's the important side. I had a guest on last night, and his episode hasn't aired. His name is Chris Bates, and he's a constable down here in Texas, in Beaumont, where I live at. And it's funny how he said the same thing you said about law enforcement wasn't his first choice. He had a background. He actually went to school for music, and he was in college for music, and he kind of got in law enforcement because he heard somebody talk about how much money they made, and he just applied. So I read your background a little bit on LinkedIn, and there's probably more you didn't put on there. I saw you were a bank teller before you got into law enforcement. What at the time made you feel that law enforcement was the right choice, besides your husband asking you to take the test?
So I went to school for banking. We both went to school I was in finance and he was in accounting. And I wanted to become a financial planner. I wanted to help people, get on their feet and become financially stable, because that's not the background that I grew up in. And I know how important that is. So I wanted to be able to help people with that. And then in 2008, the economy went, it tanked and all the finance jobs were gone. And I'm like, oh crap, like, what do I do now? So Pat was like, he was my boyfriend at the time, but he was like, look, I'm taking this test, why don't you just take it as a backup? You can still stay in banking, but like, at least you have another option. I was like, all right. And then I just continued with the process. And then we both got called into the academy, and I was like, okay, like, let's see where this goes.
Now, when you were in the academy, were you facing any like second thoughts about the fact that you went from financial planning to law enforcement?
Not really in the academy because it was still new. I think when I graduated the academy and I was standing on a foot post for the first time and I'm looking around like, somebody calls the cops and they're looking at you and you're like, wait, that's me? Like what? You know what I mean?
It's like a surreal thing.
Exactly. It was like, what do I do?
Yeah, you were probably thinking like, okay, okay, y'all called him. Who's coming? Like, hey,
Right. Exactly.
I think we've all had that moment in the beginning, even the hard charges. Like sometimes you're like, oh yeah, this is where I meant to be, and then something happens. You're like, did I actually sign up for this?
Right.
So did you remember? Did Pat have the same like same type of mindset? Did you ever talk about that, like that transition from banking and accounting to law enforcement?
We didn't really talk. It was just something that we both agreed we were going to try together and see how it went. And then if for some reason it didn't work, then we'd figure out another plan.
Yeah. That's sometimes how it goes. So 12 years later, because you started in 2011, right?
Correct.
That's right. So 12 years later, you've grown a lot as a person. Obviously, 3 kids later, you've grown as a spouse. What has driven you to stay in this career up to this point?
Being in the unit that I am now, it was always a goal of mine to get into I'm in the employee assistance unit. Some programs there like EAPS, EAP. I do mental health support and outreach and peer support to other cops. So I always liked helping people, but now there's an added layer of fulfillment, I guess I would say, because now I'm helping like my fellow brothers and sisters.
And I was looking at your social media. I want to say it might have been your IG or your LinkedIn, but you were recently at not a seminar. I can't think of it. I saw your table set up. Where were you at? You weren't at
the One Police Plaza. Yeah.
One Police. Okay. Was that a recruiting event?
No, what we did, our health and wellness team started doing because September is National Suicide Awareness and Prevention Month. So we set up a table just to do outreach, and we had like little giveaways just to get people, to come over and talk and just open a conversation, even if it's just small talk, because sometimes that's like all you need is like a little window in, when people can like put a face to a name. And then if they ever go through something or if they know somebody who's going through something, then they're like, oh yeah, I remember that person. I saw her at a table.
So everybody usually has a story on why they take these certain roles in. I know for me, my mother suffered from depression when I was growing up, and things I saw through law enforcement, and I saw my friends taking their lives. I saw the atmosphere of law enforcement, George Floyd, the horrible numbers we've had in staffing. What is Dina's story on how she got to peer support unit?
I think it's been a few things along the way. So definitely the most impactful was 2 months after I graduated the academy, one of the guys in my company died by suicide. We didn't see each other after we graduated. I was in Manhattan and he was in the Bronx. But I remember finding out by our delegate, and I was just in shock because he was like such a funny guy, I mean, not outward goofy kind of funny, but like dry, sarcastic, like always had a comment, like just very funny. But how do you really, how well do you really know somebody? You think you're in the academy with someone for 6 months and you think you know them, and then, you don't see them, and 2 months later they're gone. It's like, it just left had a lot of questions. Going to that funeral and seeing his family, and just feeling it myself, like feeling the weight of it. I was like, if I can help somebody so that no family ever has to go through this again, it would be worth it. And then this was now some years later, after I had my daughter, I ended up having like some postpartum anxiety that I never was diagnosed with because I never got checked out. I didn't want to come back to work and I didn't want to be stigmatized. I didn't want like my gun to be taken away. So I just kind of went through the motion, and I was dealing with that for a little while. And then, the more you talk about it with other mothers on this job, you're like, oh, wow, this is more common than I thought.
Yeah, my ex-wife at the time, she well, ex-wife, now wife at the time. She's a first responder. She's in nursing. And I remember her going through postpartum, and it caught her off guard because she's usually a pretty strong shell in general. And some things she went through was it wasn't common for her. So I don't know, like, everything you went through. Obviously, she didn't have a gun or a badge, but she had some stigma issues as well. How did that impact your performance at work? Because I'm guessing, I don't know how long the postpartum lasted, but you probably still had it back when you threw the uniform on. Like how did that impact you? Like, what was your mindset during that time?
I was stressed out all the time. I was constantly worried about getting a phone call from my mother who was watching my daughter at the time, like something was going to be wrong. How was I going to get home if I had to race home? Like at the end of every shift, I really like getting through the day was a blur because my mind was always so distracted. And then at the end of the day, I would take the uniform off and I couldn't get out of the precinct fast enough. And I would rush home because like I wasn't going to be satisfied. The anxious thoughts weren't going to stop until I held my daughter.
How did you overcome that? Like, was there like a certain thing, or was it just time? I mean, do you remember a point where you just said, hey, you know what? I don't have this anxiety like this anymore?
I remember one of those nights I got stuck late and I was driving home and I was so anxious and I felt like a lump in my throat and like the tears started to well up. And I called a friend who I knew who had a baby a year or two before me, maybe. So she was pretty recent in dealing with all this stuff. And she picked up the phone and I'm like, do you have a minute? And she goes, yeah, what's up? And I just broke down. And then after talking to her, I think we were on the phone for maybe 15, 20 minutes. And she reassured me that she's like, look, like this is all new for you. You're a first time parent, like there's no instruction manual for these kids. Like you figure it out as you go and you do the best you can. And that's all you can do. Like, you don't have to put all this pressure on yourself. But I felt so much better after talking to her, and she kind of helped validate and normalize everything that I was going through.
Now, you said you went to school for finance, but you're using some terms that sound kind of psychological. Validate, normalize. Like I think you're tricking us right now. So I don't want to pivot all the way off this topic, but how did you gain this education on some of this? Because this isn't normal vernacular for someone that has a finance background or a police officer.
When I went through the peer support program, we get like a mental health first aid training, and we kind of learn some of these terms. And it's things that most of us do every day, like just talking to people and taking an interest, listening empathetically. But yeah, that's where I learned all the stuff in the peer support program. And then now that I teach it, I use these words all the time.
There you go. So, okay, good. So how has your life changed as you start teaching stuff like this?
It's definitely made me more comfortable. I wouldn't say I was uncomfortable speaking in front of a crowd. I always had really bad imposter syndrome though. Like who does this person think she is? Like what are her qualifications? But I'm definitely more confident in front of people now. And even being vulnerable in front of people. I always thought that I had to like present this image of what people wanted to see or what people were expecting. And that never came off right. And once I started being vulnerable and just talking to people from like a human being to human being, not like, you're a boss or, whatever disregard your title. You're like, we're both human beings. Let's just have a conversation. Then everything else kind of falls to the wayside.
Because we're all humans at the end of the day.
Exactly.
We came into this industry without a uniform on. And all of us, when we leave it, we're not going to have we're going to have to get off the uniform at some point. We're taking this uniform off. So I'm happy that you found that transition as far as creating vulnerability. I know when I first started instructing, I instructed a lot of factual information, but as I progressed as a speaker and I trained myself, I realized being a vulnerable speaker, you get the message across even better. So at what point did you see that happen, like with your presentations, where you actually said, you know what, it's time to take off this badge so to speak. It's time to take off this shield. It's time to take off this front. Like, when did you start taking the front off?
When I was still in the precinct and I was doing peer support on the precinct level, because our program is structured a little bit different, and I'll get into it in a minute, but I was doing peer support in the precinct. My daughter actually got into this horrible bus accident, and we thought we lost her. Yeah. I mean, until I got to the hospital to see her, like, they didn't even know what condition she was in. So I was dealing with that, and I had so much support, and so many people from my precinct were like reaching out to me while I was out and I was home with her. And I'm like, you know what? Like, you're always so afraid. Not you, me. I was always so afraid of like people finding out my business, because like sometimes it can be a little bit of a rumor mill, and, things get out of hand, and, the gossip goes in a whole different direction. But when people heard about what happened with my daughter, just all the love and the support that I got, I'm like, man, who am I putting up a front for? Like, what am I even doing? If I can't be my genuine self and show up as my genuine self, like, how is anybody going to believe that I want to be there to support them if I can't even support me?
You're right. So tell us about the structure that you're about to say with the peer support for the department.
Okay, so our employee assistance unit is a full-time unit, and in addition to that, so we're made up of peer counselors. We also have uniform and civilian members of the service in each command that get this training, the peer support training, and then they go back to their commands and they perform whatever their normal day-to-day function is. And the idea behind that is to kind of, they're going to be an added layer of support in their commands for their coworkers that they see on a normal everyday day-to-day basis, that somebody might be more comfortable approaching them with something because they know the person, as opposed to calling a number to talk to a person that they may not know.
Do you think that this breaks down the barrier or the stigma of mental health, like support?
Absolutely. Because the more the peers in their command talk about things, even if it's, some of our peers have a mental health, they have a bulletin board and they put up, if somebody had a baby, they put that up. If somebody, maybe they experienced a loss, somebody in the family passed away, they'll put that up just so people can come together and support them. And the more, if there's a suicide awareness event or a mental health, themed event, that goes up on the board. And the more these boards are updated and people in the command can see these different things, I think it just kind of normalizes that, like you said before, we're all human beings and we all deal with things.
How has all this impacted your family life, some of this new training you've gotten? Because obviously you're thinking at a whole nother level than you were back in 2011.
Yeah, it's definitely made me much more aware and much more of an active listener for my kids and my husband. And I also, especially with the kids, realize that if it's important to them, like, even if in the grand scheme of things, like, for example, my son will throw a temper tantrum because he's 5 and he gets frustrated when he's tying his shoes. And I'm like, it's really not that big of a deal. But to him, like, that's the biggest deal of the moment.
Of the world, yeah.
So it kind of like gives me some perspective. And I'm like, okay, let's calm down. Like, let's take a breath. We'll figure it out together. You know what I mean? So that when I take a phone call, if it's maybe an experience that I can't relate to, but it's still important to that person, then it's important to me because it was important enough for them to tell me about it. So now, I'm going to listen, and now you have my attention.
It's funny when you talk about the magnitude of how our kids see their own problems and issues. My son, he's really into basketball. Like he's 10. Like, when I say he's into it, like, he watches YouTube videos. He dribbles all day. We have to go outside in 110-degree weather and play basketball. Like it's all day. Like, here, we'll be in the house at 3:00. He's like, Dad, I'm going outside to play. I'm doing it's like 100 degrees outside. He was like, I'll be back. 15 minutes later, came dressed. So he loves basketball. But when he loses the game, just done. And I'm trying to console him, trying to say, it's just a basketball game. But it takes me back to what you're saying, how your son gets frustrated from tying his shoes. And that's the end of there. It's the perspective side that the when I realize that everybody views things a little differently than I do, it really makes a difference.
Excuse me. Yeah, it definitely does.
Yeah. And that's what I kind of realized with like my son, I had to be on the same level. Like, okay, just because I didn't think it was that bad, he thinks it's that bad.
Mm-hmm.
So I saw something on your IG, and well, I'll let you answer this question. What is your the name on your IG?
Flawed yet faithful.
All right, tell us about that, because that's definitely not your first, middle, or last name.
No, it's not. Well, I wanted it to be. It's my personal Instagram, not a professional one. I kind of like post both, but I never want anybody to be under the impression that just because I am a religious person, I'm a practicing Catholic, my faith is a huge part of my life. I am not under any impression that I'm any better than anybody else just because I have faith. In fact, that's why my faith is so important to me, because I'm constantly making mistakes and messing up. And to me, that the grace that I have through faith is what gets me through all the tough times.
Have you been challenged like a lot about that in the past, or is it just something that you recognize just through your life?
It wasn't anything. I've been challenged in the past because I wasn't always a practicing Catholic the way I am now. I think as I had kids and I kind of looked at the world and I was like, like I was raised Catholic and then I kind of stepped away from it for a little bit, for a long bit. And then after I had kids, I was like, oh, I don't want my kids growing up. Like I want them to believe in something bigger than themselves. And so I started, and then my mother-in-law ended up getting bladder cancer. So that was kind of a way for me to come back into the church and like start praying for her and start bringing my kids, and it was, for me, it was a really beautiful way to come home. So is what it felt like.
During the last 12 years, you done reinvigorated your faith. You got into peer support. You're in these units. It seems like everything is going really well. And what do you think that's contributed to?
I don't know. I try to have a sense of what I can control and what I can't control. And I get anxiety when I start trying to control things that are out of my control. And then when I take a step back and I get some perspective, I'm like, okay, you have no control over this right now. Like you have no control over the fact that you got held for a late shift. You have to work a double. Okay. All you can do is control, are the kids taken care of? Yeah, that's okay. So then whatever else happens. You know what I mean? Instead of getting stressed out about, I don't know, like my house. Listen, I have 3 kids. Sometimes it's a mess, like, what are you going to do? Instead of like, and they want to now, like my oldest is 9 and she wants to help make dinner. And sometimes like, instead of being like, oh my gosh, you're making a huge mess in the kitchen. It's like, you know what? The only way to learn, you got to make a mess and we'll just clean it up later. Like I try to stop stressing the little things.
So, and I think that's all of us. That comes with maturity and growing up and realizing that you're right. You can and can't control everything. Like there's some things that are completely out of your reach. Like your 9-year-old saying, "Hey, I want to help cook." You got to let the 9-year-old cook at some point. I mean, they're either going to do it. They're either going to do it in your presence or out of your presence. And out of your presence is going to be an ugly sight for everybody. We know that. We don't want that. So when we're talking about like controlling, not controlling, when people come up to you, especially younger law enforcement officers, I'm sure, given what you've done in 12 years, you're part of a unit. I'm sure you have people that look up to you, whether you know it or not. How do you coach them when you talk to them about controlling like their environment and not trying to control everything?
It's so easy to get sucked into this environment, and we'll just use work about negativity and like low morale because everywhere is short staffed, and it's like, okay, and then everyone's looking around like, all right, somebody's got to do something about it. Okay, well, like, what are you doing about it? What am I doing about it? Maybe it's something as simple as acknowledging people and saying hello and checking in on somebody who you think might be going through a hard time. When I feel like I'm starting to throw myself a pity party and I'm starting to feel sorry for myself for whatever it is, the issue, I find that if I do something small for somebody else, that makes me, it's like snaps me out of it and it makes me feel better and then puts into perspective whatever it is that I'm going through.
It's I don't like pity parties myself, and I had to grow myself out of them. So I wish I would have heard this like 15 years ago myself, like, hey, you got to snap out of this, get better, realize you can't control everything, and keep moving.
One of my sergeants, when I was at the precinct, told me, like, you can be angry, you can feel however you're feeling, give yourself time, and then let it be over. Don't wallow in it. Like, feel your feelings, but don't wallow in it. And then years later, when I started therapy, my therapist told me the same thing. I'm like, oh, maybe he was onto something all those years ago.
Maybe he had gone to the same therapist. Who knows?
Right, maybe, exactly.
You're like, this sounds kind of like too similar. Like, I like.
Just like, did you meet my boss? Yeah.
Like, was this like an EAP referral that y'all didn't tell me about? Like
exactly.
Are you the only psychologist or therapist that we have?
Right.
Oh, and when I'm thinking about that side, you said something about checking in with others. Like, is that something that you guys routinely do in the unit, or is it something that you've just grown to do on your own?
It's something we routinely make a point to do in the unit. And then in peer support itself, when we teach peer support, like the 4 pillars are ask, listen, encourage, and follow up. So we always encourage people to follow up. Even now, people that I haven't spoken to since I've been out of my precinct, I keep reminders in my phone every year if it's the anniversary of the death of a parent or, the birth of a child. Like, I make sure that I put the anniversary in my phone so that it pops up so that I can just shoot them a text and say, hey, I'm thinking of you today, or whatever, just something small. And maybe that's the only interaction I have with that person all year, but I don't want them to ever feel like nobody cares.
Have you ever been surprised by any of the reactions that you've gotten from those small little follow-ups that you've done?
I think I'm just surprised at how appreciative people are. Like, I received this really nice message from this woman who I sent a text to on Mother's Day because I knew that, she was going through some things after she had her child. And she just sent me this beautiful message, like, I've never even met you, and you go out of your way to make sure to check in on me. She's like, your kids are so blessed to have you, or just like some really nice message on Mother's Day. And I was like, wow, I wasn't prepared for that, but like, that's so nice.
Yeah, I had a whole completely different story for myself, but that's much better the story that I was about to say. So you definitely had the uplifting, positive story. What I was gonna say is that I've done this routinely, and I don't usually do it with too much planning. If I'm looking through my phone or something just pops in my head, like let's say 3 years from now, I'm like, I wonder, like your name just pops in my head, I might just reach out to you. So I did this about 3 years, maybe 3 years now. 3 years ago to a guy I went to training with, and I was like, hey man, just checking to see how you're doing. Like, we haven't talked in like 6 years or something like that. Just kind of checking in. So he responds back to me probably within like 10 minutes, says, my wife died last week of an aneurysm. How'd you know?
Oh my goodness.
I was like, bro, I'm sorry. That's not, I was really just checking up on you to see how you and your, like, how the whole family was doing. And he was like, nah, man. He was like, yeah, they caught us off guard. And mind you, they were late 30s. So it wasn't like they were
so young.
Couple. Yeah. So your story, like I said, your story was a lot better than mine, like a lot more positive. But I say it. So the reason I bring it up is following up is important.
And you never know what somebody's going through when you follow up. Like, case in point, maybe that person needed to hear from you. He needed to just hear from somebody checking in.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes that's kind of how it goes. And that's what we want the viewers and people listening to understand, that part of being supportive of each other is sometimes just caring for others.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to do a lot. Like, we text all day. We're on social media all day. Just send a text to somebody. Hey, even if you see their social media, like, hey, you great photo. Is everything all right? Or how are you? How you been?
Yeah, sometimes that's all it takes.
Yeah, that's all. And like you said, I mean, I want more stories like the woman you talked to. I like her stories. Like when she says thank you, you're blessed. Like that. Those are the good ones to hear. I try to minimize the other ones, but that's the reality of what we do. That's the reality and it had nothing to do with law enforcement. It was just he happened to be he's still in law enforcement, but he was a person. His wife wasn't in law enforcement, but those are the realities that we face, and he still has to go back to work.
Yeah.
And that's
I don't even know. Yeah, exactly. Like, I don't even know how you would pick up the pieces after something like that.
They had one kid together, one girl, and I mean, I don't know. I mean, if someone came up to you and asked your advice, I mean, would you point him in a certain direction? I mean, I know what I did with him. I mean, I talked about EAP and stuff like that, but I mean, where would you point somebody?
I would just try to get an idea of exactly what they might need, like what the most important, their immediate need is, and then try to give them resources focused on that. Or like maybe a secondary need. So like in that case, maybe a therapist for themselves and their children. If they have, childcare issues, maybe helping out something like that in the example that you gave. And then I always present options, and I let somebody choose whatever option works best for them, because me giving somebody the answer, they're not going to take ownership of it and they're not going to follow through with it. But if I present somebody with options and I give them a sense of control back where maybe they feel like they have no control, then they take ownership in whatever plan that they came up with, and they're more likely to follow through with it. That's just what I find from my experience.
Yeah, and that's the power of coaching. So if people don't know, sometimes the viewer, like it took me, I learned until 2017. There's a difference between coaching and mentoring. And a mentor will usually provide you with the answer. A coach will help you get the answer. So it sounds like to me, you like coaching. Like when like for you, when you started this power of coaching, you started utilizing it. Did it change like a lot of the ways you approach things? Like, how did that work out for you?
Yes, because especially as a police officer, you get so used to like being the fixer. You show up to a job and you just give people the answer, you fix it, and then you move on to the next job. And in this role, it's different because not everybody needs you to you can't fix anybody's problems. That's the reality. They're coming to you with an issue and you can't fix it. You can present them with options. And like I tell people all the time, like, listen, this is your race that you're running. I'm right there on the sidelines cheering you on, and I'm giving you water and whatever else you might need, but you have to run this race. I will give you everything I can, but I can't run it for you.
How do they usually respond when you say that?
It's a mixed bag. It really depends on the person. Usually when I say it like that, they're receptive because they're like, oh, you know what? You're right. Because I'm like, even if I train for this race and you don't, I can't give you my training. I can support you and I can give you water so that you can get through your race, but like, I can't give you my training. So me doing it for you isn't going to help you.
You're 100% right. And that is the power of coaching. And when I've seen that in action and full speed, like where people are effectively using it, I saw a difference in people, like, because they feel more fulfilled when they figure it out on their own. Like you mentioned earlier, it's like you just get that feeling inside, like, you know what? I did this. Like, I made this choice. We've all done it. Like when people have coached you, like, how's that made you feel?
Like I have a sense of accomplishment, even if it's checking the smallest, what I would consider the smallest thing off my to-do list. It's like, all right, well, I still checked something off. I still accomplished something. And then that kind of like starts the ball rolling. And then you start accomplishing more things.
It's just that power of momentum, like that snowball. We don't get snowballs in Texas, but I know of New York, you know what I mean.
We do get them in New York. Yes.
Yeah. If I saw a snowball coming down Beaumont, Texas right now, I'd be nervous because we would be freaking out. Last time we had even like temperatures that were, I think, in the less than the teens, like we have pipes freezing and busting down here. This was back in 20.
Oh yeah, no, that's no good.
This was back in 20. Well, because we're not designed like that. Like we're just the city. We're designed for heat, but we're not designed for that. Like our roads don't crack like that. But the pipes definitely were bursting and freezing, and it was an ugly sight for like 2 or 3 weeks down here. Going forward, and you look at your career, your life, where do you see yourself? Obviously, you're in a peer support unit now. You're only 12 years in, so I don't know what your retirement looks like, but you have at least 8 years if you stay on this track. You probably 13. I don't know how your retirement plans are, but what do you see? What's next for you for all the stuff you've been doing?
I have another 10 years. I really don't know what's next. I mean, I've only been in the employee assistance unit now for like coming up on, it'll be 2 years in November. So I kind of want to just see where this goes. I would love to take the peer support program to another level and continue to do outreach and maybe just share my story with as many people who want to listen and just let people know like it's okay to be a cop and be in therapy. It's okay to admit that there's something wrong. You know, the longer you ignore it because you feel like you're going to be stigmatized, the worse off you're going to be in the long run. And I know that especially in law enforcement, there is a lot of stigma still surrounding mental health, and people are afraid of being disciplined for coming forward and seeking help. But I want to try to break down as many barriers with that as I can.
You say discipline.
10 years to do it, I have time.
Say it again.
I said, if it takes me 10 years to do it, I have time.
No, you got time. I agree. So you said something. So people coming out, and I completely support what you're saying. I just want to expand on a little bit more. You say people feeling some type of discipline for participating in these programs. What kind of discipline have you seen?
I haven't seen anybody disciplined for voluntarily coming forward and seeking help. I have seen people, unfortunately, be disciplined for not wanting help. And then they're in a situation where they get in a little bit over their head and they start to use, in an instance like a financial problems, you know, especially now lately, you get in over your head and you start to get desperate and you do things that you wouldn't normally do. And then you get yourself in trouble because you keep trying to dig yourself out of a hole, but you're digging deeper.
So you're referring to, I can't even think of the word. It was perfectly in my brain. Like, undiagnosed issues that are just kind of like spiraling out of control. And the fact that
Correct.
They're not correcting it, they're getting themselves now in trouble.
Exactly.
How often do you think that happens? If you say, let's take 10 people, how many, or whatever, 10 or 100, whatever number you want to use.
We could use 10. I'm probably the wrong person to ask because I'm an eternal optimist and I always like to believe the best. So I would say if there's 10 people going through an issue, I would like to believe realistically that it's only 1 or 2 who aren't going to voluntarily come forward and seek help. I think the other 8 at some point, maybe not initially, but at some point, they will seek help before it gets to the point that they become a disciplinary issue and they get in trouble.
That is a very optimistic answer.
I know.
Hey, Dina, you actually impressed me because my number was literally flipped on that one. Like I
really?
I was like 7 or 8. No, mind you, I want the viewers to know none of us are looking up statistics, or we're not saying we've researched this. We're just throwing out numbers based on our opinions on this one. So I don't want a psychologist or a doctor that hears it saying, you know what, that statistic is completely wrong, Michael. You guys know, guys. Exactly. This is our opinion based on some of the people we've been around. You heard Dina. She's optimistic. She says 1 to 2 won't do it. I think more like 7 or 8 will not seek the help until it's too late. I think that they won't, and it'd be almost termination, because I've had roles where I've run internal affairs, and I've been fortunate enough to have that big thinking, kind of how what we talked about earlier, like things you've done, and I've gotten down to the root of why they did it. Other investigators don't. I don't want to say they don't care, but some just don't. They're not looking at it that way. They're like, "Hey, you had a DUI. You're a moron, and you need to be fired." Versus, how did you get to that DUI? Like, are you just literally, are you an alcoholic? And if you are alcoholic, why? Because it's not always normal to, like, there's usually something that goes on with substance abuse of that level. So for me, I feel like enough people, I still don't think that we have a strong enough culture to where people are willing to come out and share their downfalls. We are getting better. I am very optimistic, because when I started in 2005, EAP, peer support units, they were there, but they were never talked about, ever. Like I didn't even know like that existed until probably like 2015. Like it took me a while to realize it. But in 2023, when we're recording this, I could tell you the industry as a whole, we're making enormous strides into making our officers better and creating that environment for them. Have you seen a change in the last 12 years in the NYPD in that area?
I've seen a change. Yes, definitely. Just since I've been in peer support and now in EAU. And I think maybe that's why my numbers are so optimistic because our unit's confidential. So we can't talk about all the calls that we get
Right.
from people before it gets to that point. But we get so many more calls for people who are proactively now looking to better themselves as opposed to the people who are begrudgingly dragged in because they got themselves in trouble.
What do you think is changing in the stigma? Because there's something changing. I mean, I have my idea and some of the things I've read, but what do you think? Because once again, you're at the largest police department in this country. What do you think is changing with the stigma as far as reporting and like mental health?
I think just talking about it more, having peer support, taking a proactive approach where that wasn't the case before. In 2019, we had a suicide epidemic where we had 10 active duty members of service die by suicide. And that is where we created like the critical incident debriefing program that we didn't have before, the peer support program. And I actually love sitting in on those critical incident debriefings when somebody who hasn't been down there before it's their first one, because they're like looking around and they're really nervous. And then once we explain to them, like, you're not being assessed like fitness for duty, we're not even presuming that anything is wrong. You don't even have to talk about the job while you're down here. You could talk about something else or you could talk about nothing, but everybody has to come down to eliminate the stigma because if you and I got called down together and it was optional and you decided you didn't want to go down and I decided I did want to go down, then we know that people would be talking about me after I left.
Correct.
But because everybody has to go down and talk about these critical incident debriefings, I think that alone is a huge barrier to eliminating stigma.
Is the criteria for those critical incident debriefing, is that public? The criteria that you guys have as far as like people that are required to like the calls or whatever, is that open to the public for anybody to see like what those different calls
What's
are
discussed in?
No, not what I like. What would require an officer? Like I'm sure there's a list of 10 type of calls or 15. Is that open to the public?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. Usually if it's like something that's a lot of like a high media profile attention or, like a really gory, horrendous job is something that's like outside of the norm. Because, we don't have a normal job. We see things that the average person doesn't see in their lifetime. We may see multiple, incidents in a shift, in a tour. So yeah, anything that's outside of the norm, those jobs get flagged and they get sent down to a critical incident debriefing.
And the reason why I bring it up, because I went through some critical things as a police officer, Border Patrol of Corrections. And back when I was a police officer, the things that I went through, I believe would now be a critical incident. But back then, it wasn't a shooting. It wasn't a homicide of any sort. It wasn't a hanging. It wasn't that guy. It wasn't anything that got our violent crimes or a homicide unit out. So nobody really paid attention. But now I think that a lot of agencies, especially the NYPD, I mean, you guys are usually on the forefront between NYPD and California. It's like it's always like a neck and neck on who's coming out with the progressive thinking. Like, and that's cool because I mean, you guys have a lot of great brains there. But I believe that because other incidents have been added to the critical incident debriefs and things like that, I believe we do get more people willing to speak, especially if the whole group has to go.
Exactly.
And when I look back at the things that I went through, that's what I think about. I'm like, let's see, if the whole unit had to go through this, I think we would have been a lot more open because in one situation, It was after it was just two incidents, two long incidents for us. And me and my buddy, we didn't have the critical incident debriefs after action. We didn't have nothing like that. And our resort was all you can drink Blue Moon and all you can eat crab legs. So,
Yep.
but if we would have been forced, which is good, or let's say require, because forced people get nervous about that word. If we were all required or mandated to go just to sit in a room and draw, I don't know, like you said, sit there and talk about the New York Yankees, I don't know, talk about something, talk about Aaron Rodgers blowing his Achilles on the first game. I don't know, whatever it might be. The fact everybody would have to go there, I think that would have changed the way we viewed things back then. And now that we do have to do it, I see the positive push that we're taking. When you talk to people that are not in your unit and maybe people that you used to work with, have you seen them changing as well with some of these things you have going on? Do they approach you differently now?
The people who I used to work with, I don't think they approach me differently because I was always like an open type of person who would check in on people and just see how they were doing, like on a regular basis. The things that people approach me with, the issues that people open up to me with are different, I think. And it's if for the better. People are more willing to share personal things that they might have thought in the past they would be stigmatized for, now they're coming forward and sharing that they need help with something. And that's such a rewarding and beautiful thing to see.
Yeah, because with a good personality, people are naturally going to flow to you and say, hey, you know what, this is what we have going on. But as soon as they realize that they can trust you with their, like you said, their vulnerable incidents, that's when you make an even stronger connection to people.
Absolutely. And I didn't learn that until I started being vulnerable myself, and being available to hold space for people so that they could open up.
There was a time when you had to become vulnerable for the very first time with the very first person. Was that like a butterfly moment in your stomach? Was that did that create anxiety?
Oh my gosh. Yes. It was like butterfly. It was like shaky voice. My face probably turned red. They were like, what is going on with her? Like, is she okay? It was probably about my oldest daughter's bus accident. And I don't think I could have made it through probably without crying. But it was good for somebody to see me because, people don't need us to be perfect. They just need us to be present. Mm-hmm. So when I'm fully present and I'm being vulnerable, then the other person knows that it's safe to reciprocate.
And that's important because it's like the concept of respect. People want respect, but sometimes they don't give it. Same thing with vulnerability. You want people to be vulnerable, but if they see you as a robot or just a shell or something like that, they're not going to be willing to just say, hey, Dina, this is what's really going on with my life. If they don't think you're going to do that. So when they saw you with your situation, they were like, oh, okay. Now she's thinking like us.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, now she's really going through something. Okay. Welcome to the club.
Yeah. And I could tell you being a professional speaker, like I said, early on even before I became a professional speaker, just when I was doing instruction, I was all about the facts, the data. Hey, my job is to get this information into your brain. All these bullet points, all this content, these learning objectives, that's my goal. And then I started to realize about the vulnerability side. And once again, I was able to help people learn more, how people open up more because they saw me, once again, as a human versus just the uniform or the badge or the instructor. Oh, he's up there speaking. Okay. And like you're saying, that vulnerability really changed that dynamic.
100%. When I started teaching peer support, I was so worried about getting all the information out and making sure that everybody had all the facts and all the knowledge and all the skills. And the more I taught, the more I realized that developing a cohesiveness and a camaraderie within the group and making the classroom so that people feel comfortable opening up to each other and being vulnerable about their own struggles, it helps the group as a whole, and it helps everybody individually learn the material better and just become a better person.
Yeah, when you can draw into someone's emotions, you connect a lot better. I mean, it's human nature. If you were marketing your unit right now to a prospective officer that was considering getting in, what would you do? Or what would you say?
Somebody who wanted to apply to be in the unit?
That were kind of thinking about it. And they're like, yeah, you know what? We want to help people, but we don't really know if there's a unit for us. How do you market your unit?
That's fair. It is a unit that helps people. At the end of the day, we have resources within the department and outside the department, and we will connect somebody with any resource that works best for them. At the end of the day, we don't care where they go for help as long as they get help somewhere. We do have on call, so we're available 24/7. Some other resources are not. I actually was just on call last week. So after the office closes, calls get forwarded to an on-call phone. Mm-hmm. And then in the middle of the night, like last year, I was on call Christmas Day. I was like a wreck, like waiting for the phone to ring the whole time.
But you don't know. Yeah.
Thank God.
Holidays are tough.
Fine.
Holidays, if people don't know, law enforcement, holidays are rough.
Yes, I was on call on Thanksgiving and Christmas. But yeah, but that's okay. Any time of day, if somebody, needs something, and usually like those calls in the middle of the night are people who are really going through something, but they don't want to talk about it during the day. And that's fine. And we're here. And even if you call us and you don't want to use us as a resource, as long as you're calling us to talk about it, we'll connect you with any resource. So I would say just being available, being willing to make yourself available to other people, but also realizing how important it is to take care of yourself. Because if you're not taking care of yourself, you can't take care of anybody else. You can't show up for anybody else, whether that be professionally or personally.
And you don't really want to show up for other people if you're not whole. I'd say that all the time. I'm like, we want to help so many people, but we can't help ourselves.
Exactly.
And when you do that,
go ahead. I was going to say, sometimes it's easier to focus on everything that everybody else is going through in order to avoid dealing with our own issues. But when we do deal with our own stuff and we are taking care of ourselves, then it makes helping somebody else or connecting with somebody else that much easier and that much better for the other person, because now you're showing up fully for them.
Yeah, and part of my book, that's kind of what I talk about, focusing on yourself. And usually when I give presentations like keynotes and they're like, what do you mean focus? I said, yes, be selfish. Be selfish with your development, because you can't grow your family, your team, your squad, your organization if you're not doing what you have to do for yourself. How can you teach something that you don't understand? Not saying you have to experience, like some things some of the things people have gone through, I don't want to go through. I don't have to be shot. I don't have to lose a loved one in that way. I don't need that to understand or to go do it. But I need to at least understand that I need to develop myself. I need to find things to overcome failures. I need to find ways to control my stress. Because if I don't know how to do that, how am I teaching that to the next person?
Exactly.
So as we look at all this you have going on, once again, 12 years, 3 kids, your husband's a sergeant, you're in EAU, you're progressing. You hope over the next 10 years that you can make all this work even more. I know on my side, I really got into mental wellness about 2 or 3 years ago when I started looking at the environment that I grew up in. I started looking at the environment that I was working in. I looked at the law enforcement environment and I realized that we were missing something. So I didn't understand as well. So I went and studied it. So you're obviously there. You're doing it. You're doing it for a lot of people. You're available, which is good. If somebody was looking to reach out to you, they said, Dina, you know what? We love this podcast. We love your message. We want to hear your story. We want to figure out how we're an EAU or how we can get into it. How would somebody reach you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place to reach me. Dina Campbell on LinkedIn. I'm also on Instagram. It's flawed_yet_faithful.
So those are the main two.
Yeah.
Say it again. Those are the best two for you?
Yes.
Okay. So guys, you LinkedIn, Dina Campbell, and then IG, Flawed Yet Faithful. And I can tell you guys, she does post a lot. She does a lot of videos on IG, and we were kind of talking about that earlier, that obviously she has a knack for speaking. She has a knack for motivating, because through life experiences, in the beginning, we don't know how to share them. And she's already at the point to where she's sharing and growing, and she wants to see people grow, because obviously she does not know, but none of us have to do what we're doing right now. We do it because we want to, because we're passionate. We want to see each and every one of you grow. That's why we do what we do. So, Dina, any final words for the audience?
The only thing I would say is be the change. Whatever change you want to see, you get to choose how you want to be it, but go out and do it. It doesn't matter if you don't have all the expert knowledge. It doesn't matter whatever you think the shortcomings are. You have to start somewhere. You can just start somewhere and start slow, but do it.
Guys, you hear how simple that is? Just go be the change. Literally, you don't need a lot. When I used to hear the OGs tell me that back when I started as a police officer, I was like, what do you mean just be the change or be the change? That's all I got to do. All I got to do is like just try. They was like, yeah, don't overthink it, rookie. And I was like, why y'all got to do me like that? They was like, trust us. When you get a little bit older and a little bit more mature, you're going to realize sometimes just giving some kind of effort is a lot better than not giving any effort at all. So it doesn't take a lot for you guys to be the change. It doesn't take a lot for us to grow, but like Dina said, being the change is going to impact what we're doing each and every day. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you, gals, for tuning in. I know this is an amazing episode, and I know you're going to gain a lot of value and insight. If you have any questions, you want to know how to get motivated in this area, you want to just grow yourself, you want to be the change, reach out to Dina. Find her on LinkedIn. Find her on IG. You guys know what she's doing. She's making a change. She shows us she's leading by example. She's walking proof of someone that believes in a cause that's bigger than her. And she's taken that time to grow others, but also developing herself. So if you guys are looking for that kind of motivation, that kind of skill set, reach out to her, because that's why I reached out to her myself, because I saw that in her. I was like, you know what? I got to get her on this podcast, because there's people that need to hear what she's doing. So once again, thank you guys for viewing. Thank you for taking the time out of your day, evening, morning. Maybe you're driving to work. Maybe you're taking that hour drive to New York. Maybe you're just in between calls for service, whatever it is. But thank you for taking the time and watching. Make sure you comment, you share, and do whatever to just be the change for somebody, guys. Thank you, guys. Y'all have a great day, great night. See you on the next episode.
You've been listening to the LEO First Podcast. Michael has been in law enforcement since 2005. He's worked for 3 law enforcement agencies in 3 different states. He's a professional speaker who travels the country teaching about leadership development and self-awareness. And he's the author of a book called Greatness Beyond the Badge: The 3 Key Principles for Self-Awareness. It's Michael's passion to bring law enforcement members' stories to the front, so you get the real and raw take. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hook up with Michael on YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Michael Laidler. On Twitter at Michael A. Laidler. On Facebook at Michael Laidler Leadership. Send an email to michael@michaelalaidler.com and hit the website at michaelalaidler.com. See you next time on the LEO First Podcast.